Newcastle United have destroyed Manchester United by 4-1, and a lot of the focus has been on how poor Manchester United have been, but I think that Newcastle deserve their flowers. So that's exactly what we're going to do in this video. We're going to be taking a look at the tactics involved that helped Newcastle outclass Man United to put them one step closer to those Champions League places. From the beginning, Newcastle posed Manchester United a number of problems, in particular looking to exploit their 3-4-2-1 formation, and the imbalance came through the centre of the park, with Newcastle's 3 midfielders and Manchester United's 2. This happened with the way that Newcastle wanted to build down both flanks, pushing Trippier and Livramento really high, forcing Manchester United to take stock of that and really account for that on both sides. Fernandes and Garnacho did their best to try and account for this, but it normally dragged across both Eriksen and Ugarte to try and make up the numbers on either side of the pitch, depending on where Newcastle were developing. This meant that Joe Linton or Bruno Guimaraes had a number of different opportunities and spaces to then be able to exploit behind Eriksen and Ugarte. The positioning of Tonali in that midfield 3 meant that one of Eriksen and Ugarte needed to go forwards because Joshua Zirkzee wanted to push on to Schär and Burn. This had a number of knock-on effects for the space that was left in behind the 2 Manchester United midfielders, and more often than not you saw Newcastle exploit this pretty brilliantly. You can see a really good example of this right here. Manchester United are quite strong in central areas. Of course, you've got the 2 main midfielders, but the back 3 in particular and the narrow front 3 means that going through the centre of the pitch is more difficult than going down the sides. And this is where Newcastle started to find some joy. In progressing the ball down this right-hand side in this particular instance, what Newcastle found was that United needed to come across to deal with this situation. Note the positioning of Eriksen and Ugarte to move across just to help with that flooding of that area. The knock-on effect for this is the positioning that Joe Linton finds himself in and Bruno Guimaraes. Notice where they are in between Manchester United's midfield line and their defensive line. This gave them a number of different opportunities to not only run into space that Man United had held, but also at the same time give themselves pockets to be able to work in to move the ball from right to left or vice versa. Notice also the positioning of Harvey Barnes here. Notice how narrow Manchester United are as well. Narrowness is a good thing when it comes to defensive play, but if you're too narrow, it gives the opposition a number of different opportunities to exploit that space, and that's exactly what happens here. As this play develops down this right-hand side, what you've got is Newcastle building quite well, Bruno Guimaraes dropping a little bit, but notice the positioning of Joe Linton, Alexander Isak and Harvey Barnes. All of a sudden, before you've got that cross coming into the box, you've got a 3v3. This is because Lenny Yoro has come across. Diogo Dalot has made himself narrow with that back 3 as well, and it means that once the ball gets crossed into the box, it's a lot of danger. You're having those 1v1 duels, and this is something that Newcastle encouraged time after time again, those 1v1 duel opportunities to try and get as many different battles as possible, because they knew that they would be able to overpower Manchester United if they got themselves into those positions. Aggression and positioning were paramount to the way that Newcastle wanted to disrupt Manchester United's build-up from the get-go, and they did this through positioning their players into really aggressive, smart positions to best really press Manchester United into their own half. Livramento being really aggressive down this left-hand side, Joe Linton and Bruno Guimaraes having almost free roles to go and press certain situations, but still pinning themselves onto both Ugarte and Eriksen. In build-up, this gave Newcastle a number of different opportunities, giving Tonali something of a free role to move into different scenarios depending on where the ball would be for Newcastle. Because Ugarte would be on Joe Linton and Bruno Guimaraes on Eriksen, it gave Tonali that freedom to be able to move into these different pockets, again overloading this Manchester United midfield and meaning that they were able to really dominate that space. As well as that, their man-marking system that Newcastle operated with gave them a number of different opportunities. Barnes onto Mazraoui, Joe Linton pushing forwards, and of course Alexander Isak making himself a nuisance as well. We'll touch on the man-mark system a little bit later, but what this actually did, along with the aggression that Newcastle had, was really pen Manchester United in towards their own half, forcing them to recycle possession a number of times and having the ball turn over a great deal of opportunities as well. This gave Newcastle a real foothold in the match and gave them the presence they needed to pen Manchester United in and eventually get themselves their goal. And it was this real aggression that led to Newcastle's first goal. So what have you got? You've got Manchester United progressing the ball, or attempting to, down their right-hand side, Newcastle's left. But notice the positioning of Livramento. Notice how aggressive he is. Same for Dan Burn pushing onto Garnacho. You've also got Joe Linton onto Ugarte. This was a feature of Newcastle's play throughout the entirety of the game, enforcing and encouraging those 1v1 battles. They knew they would be able to win due to their power, their pace, their presence. This is where the contrast comes in with them and Manchester United, and why people are complaining so much about the United team. But remember, Newcastle have encouraged this. They want this. They've needed to do this to be able to win the game, because they are confident in themselves with their individual battles. It goes out to Mazraoui, and notice the positioning that Joe Linton has taken. He's pressurising the ball to make sure that they're able to get that turnover closer to United's goal. It ends up coming back out to Ugarte, and you've got Tonali pressuring as well, making sure he's picking up the position that Joe Linton had, because he's vacated that role to help press Man United. As this comes out, you've got Lindelof playing a wayward pass because of the pressure that's being put on, again, by Joe Linton. It's really, really well done, and eventually you found themselves with a turnover. Newcastle have. But again, notice the positioning of Sandro Tonali here. Normally you'd see him at the base of this Newcastle midfield, but instead, because of the pressure that Newcastle have been putting Man United under, he's found himself a little bit further forwards. He's going to pick up a really interesting position just over here. He's going to find himself in this area. Make sure you take stock of that and take note of that, because something really interesting happens. Before the ball gets properly recycled by Newcastle, ready to play it into either the striker or one of the more attacking players, notice what Sandro Tonali is doing here. Look at the gesture that he's making. Look at this. He's pointing towards Alexander Isak, saying, play it in, and I'll make that run round. All orchestrated. He's seen the play. He's seen the space that's been available between Lindelof and Yoro. He's seen where Isak is, and he knows Isak can play this pass. Again, really well done. The knowledge of each other, the ability to really read the situation for each other is super, super good. So as the ball gets played in by Trippier into Alexander Isak, who drops to receive the pass, you've got Tonali making a movement, but you've also got him making a look. Look at this. He turns his head to make sure that Isak is on the same wavelength as him. Of course he is, and as this gets turned round, you see Isak drop to receive that pass. Look at him drop here. Look at Trippier playing that pass in. Really, really good. And Tonali's going to be making that run into this space and this channel. United are holding quite a good line, but the way that they work at Newcastle and the way that they're able to play it forwards is so good. I actually think that the way that Tonali runs and the fact that Isak needs to take a second touch almost gives Newcastle a little bit extra time to help beat that offside line. It was so well done. It's a great pass by Isak, and it's really well orchestrated. Obviously, it goes to Tonali, who volleys it into the bottom left-hand corner. It's just sensational. But again, those little movements, those little micro-adjustments from both Tonali and Isak gave them the real foothold within this move to get themselves that goal. It is absolutely spectacular. Newcastle's second was typical and quintessential Newcastle. You've got Livramento driving down this left-hand side. Again, notice how narrow Dalot has come in. That's because he's concerned about the positioning of Mazraoui, because he's come out to challenge for a header earlier, and the positioning of Harvey Barnes, who was pushed a little bit more central because of the role that Livramento had to dominate this left flank. As Livramento comes forwards, what you've then got is his ability to not only beat Dalot as if he wasn't there, but also play in a really dangerous cross. Again, pace, power, presence, everything you would have that would be synonymous with a high-power Newcastle side. You've also got runners into the box. You've got Jacob Murphy. You've got Alexander Isak. You've got Harvey Barnes. Pace, power, presence, dangerous. Really, really well done. Of course, Murphy is still there to get it back in, and notice the positioning of Harvey Barnes after this move comes through. Remember how I said he was pushed a little bit more central because of the width of Livramento. It was in doing this that overloaded Manchester United on a couple of occasions and gave Barnes the license to be able to go and make that run. If he was stuck out wide, he wouldn't be able to make that run, but he is able to do so here. So as it comes back in, you've got him in this position. Remember, you've also got Isak here as well. Really well done. He's the one on the move. The United players are stuck, waiting, watching the ball, but he's not. He's ready, and he's taking that initiative, and he gets his rewards. It's really well done. As I said, quintessential Newcastle, just top play. One of the best things about this game from a Newcastle perspective for me is the variance in which they score their goals. And what I mean by that is the different avenues that they took to be able to get themselves not only a lead, but then go forwards with that, and the way that they scored their different goals. So a lot of people will look at this, and as I said earlier, really focusing on Manchester United and how bad they are. For example, Mazraoui falls over in the build-up to this goal. Now, a lot of people will look at that and say, oh, well, it's a mistake, move on. But here on this channel, we go a little bit deeper. You guys know this. We like to push it a little bit further. Why has that happened? Well, one of the things that we really need to talk about is the Newcastle defensive shape and their defensive line. How has this come about? Notice how narrow Newcastle are. Now, remember what I said about being narrow earlier. I labelled it almost as a negative for Man United because they were so compact and so narrow, and that gave a lot of real drive down the flanks, which Newcastle utilised. But as long as you have players who are able to come out and contest, like Livramento here, and like Trippier on the other side, even Jacob Murphy can come and do the same thing on the other side. If you've got players to go out and contest, you're okay. You want to protect the centre first. But look at Mazraoui here. He has two options. He can either play out to Dalot, who is his right wing back. Remember, he's the centre-back in this particular scenario. Or you can try and play into man. Now, a crucial and key thing here for Man United and Newcastle is Newcastle's conditioning of Man United. They've conditioned United to believe that Dan Burn will be aggressive onto Mount immediately. That will be in Mazraoui's head. And the fact that it's in his head means that he's going to question whether to pass the ball there. Instead, he doesn't want to give up possession. He doesn't want to relinquish possession. He's going to try and recycle. And in trying to recycle, he's going to have to go backwards. In going backwards, United are then going to have to retreat. And look at the starting position. We're going to go back a second. Look at the starting position that Mazraoui has the ball in. Look here. Now, we take stock of that and take note of it. Remember that. Remember where he is. And what we're going to do is we're going to see, as this plays on, we're going to see where Mazraoui ends up with the ball when he ends up falling over and obviously having that mistake. So the ball comes back. The ball is in midair currently. It's going to be recovered by Ugarte. And as it moves forward, he's going to pass back to Mazraoui. Now, you've lost so many yards at this point, but at the same time, Newcastle are pushing high. They're being aggressive. Again, the conditioning that they've given Manchester United over this time. So as it goes forwards, look at this position here. Look at where Mazraoui is compared to where he had the ball previously. This is down to Newcastle's great aggression. This is down to their great defensive shape and their real pressure onto Manchester United to prevent them from playing forwards. Obviously, it's unfortunate for Mazraoui that he falls over, but then you've got Harvey Barnes and he's able to take this space. The positioning of Isak here is absolutely crucial because without Isak, Lindelof can come and contest. Yoro is too far away, so he's trying to cover this area, but it's just so well done from Newcastle, and the time that it takes for Barnes to get from here to here is nothing at all, and it gives him the ability to finish and give Newcastle their third goal. But there is so much more to that goal than just Mazraoui falling over. So much more credit to be given to Newcastle that I don't think too many other places are doing. At least not from what I've seen from the mainstream media. But here on this channel, we go a little bit further, and we want to take a real more introspective look at how this comes about, and that's exactly what we've done here. Harvey Barnes is absolutely sensational, but that Newcastle defensive structure is so integral. Earlier on, I mentioned Newcastle's man-marking system, and this is it. This is the way they tactically outclass Manchester United from minute one. We're going to be discussing the way the Man United want to build, and we're also going to be discussing how Newcastle stopped that and how it led to their fourth and final goal in this scenario. Again, remember what we said earlier, it's more than the mistake. This game is more about than the mistakes. It's more than that. It's far more than that, and we're going to really focus on what Newcastle did so well. So let's talk about Manchester United. You've got their build-up here. You've got Yoro and Mazraoui splitting, the two centre-backs moving forwards, and you've got Lindelof pushing on a little bit to give an extra angle. This really is looking towards playing out, spreading this play to look to either go out wide or to find a spare man. What Newcastle ended up doing was utilising a man-mark system. So Bruno Guimaraes went onto one of the centre-backs, Isak held on to Lindelof in the centre, and Barnes went to Mazraoui, preventing the progression from either one of these centre-backs. This meant that they needed to find somewhere else. They needed to go long. Joshua Zirkzee was an option until Rasmus Højlund came on, and of course what you had is the conditioning that I mentioned earlier that Dan Burn would be aggressive onto Zirkzee, or it could be Fabian Schär. The aggression is key though. Making sure that they're able to recycle possession and turn over the ball as much as possible. And it happened time after time again with Zirkzee, which meant that Bayindir wasn't comfortable with that long pass over to Zirkzee anymore, which means he wanted to look elsewhere. You had Livramento onto Garnacho or Livramento onto Dalot. You had Trippier onto Bruno. Time after time again, you had Manchester United in these awkward situations where there wasn't a player available, there wasn't a player free, which meant that Bayindir had to go long because there wasn't enough movement, and then you're asking for a 50-50. Then you're asking to try and get one of your players to win that 1v1 duel. Remember what I said earlier? Encouraging those 1v1 battles between Newcastle and Manchester United, because Newcastle backed themselves to win. They backed their strength, they backed their aggression, and it paid off tenfold. You've got Amas and Murphy, and there were pairings like this all over the park, and this is where it really fell down for Man United, because they couldn't get out of this 1v1 duel setup. They couldn't get out of this man-mark press. Their movement wasn't good enough. The ability on the ball wasn't good enough. The ability off the ball wasn't good enough. Eriksen didn't move enough. Ugarte isn't known for dropping and then playing as a main pivot. It just didn't work, and Newcastle knew this and capitalised brilliantly. And this is how Newcastle's fourth was built up. Again, this appears to be the tagline of this video, but it's more than the mistake. Remember that, guys. It's more than the mistake. It's how the mistake was caused. It's what Newcastle did so well to encourage that mistake. So what have you got here? You've got Yoro on the ball currently. He's been given the ball by Bayindir, and look at how wide and free both centre-backs are. But they're not free, are they? No. They're not free because you've got Bruno Guimaraes pressurising, you've got Harvey Barnes pressurising, and you've got Alexander Isak stopping Lindelof from receiving the ball. You've also, at the same time, got Joe Linton, who's just off your screen currently, but we can take a look at him right now. Look at the positioning of Joe Linton onto Ugarte. Look at the positioning of Bruno Fernandes. Now, Bruno Fernandes has recognised this, and he's dropped himself. He's looking for that pass. He's trying to drag some move some players around. But in this particular scenario, it doesn't work out. And it doesn't work out because the ball goes back to Bayindir, and look what you've got. You've got Bruno dropping, which is why Tonali has moved out. You've got Lindelof trying to make some space, but it's unable to. Isak has left Lindelof now to pressure Bayindir. That's key. It's all about the major decision making, the ability for Isak to decide, no, now is time to go and press. And they'll have worked on this, Newcastle. Look at the positioning of Joe Linton onto Ugarte. So what have you got from a Man United point of view? This isn't on, this isn't on, this isn't on. Yes, you could go here, but he's going to be pressured by Harvey Barnes, so it's not really on. It's difficult for Bayindir in this situation. And of course he's come in instead of Onana, which is another big issue. But as he tries to play it over the top, he gets intercepted by Joe Linton. It obviously goes back to Bruno Guimaraes. He's trying to find the likes of Eriksen or maybe Rasmus Højlund later down the line. It goes to Bruno Guimaraes, who just quite simply slots it home pretty perfectly and puts Newcastle 4-1 up. It was a sensational performance. It was a demolishing performance from Newcastle United, which, as I said earlier, puts them one step closer to Champions League football. But of course, let me know what you think in the comment section below, guys. What did you make of the game? What did you make of Newcastle? I would love to hear from you, so please do get involved. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something new, and hope to see you in the next one. But until then, my friends, take care.